Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey, welcome back to Some Things Considered, where we are obsessed with story on this podcast. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to figure out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm a writer. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University. I run 1455, a arts nonprofit. You can find out more about all that at seanmurphy.net. But as I always like to say right up front, the thing I love most about the different things I do is that it gives me the opportunity to meet and occasionally chat and learn from amazing and accomplished people. Today is no exception. This is not only someone I admire, but someone I consider a friend. I always love chopping it up with Hannah. Today's guest is Hannah Grieco, and let me introduce her officially, and then we'll get into why she's so awesome. But here's the brief bio, because her bio is much longer than this, folks. Hannah is a writer, developmental editor, teacher, and disability advocate in the Washington, D.C. area. You can read her work in many outlets, including the Washington Post, Al Jazeera, The Independent, Huffington Post, the Rumpus, and many more, underline many more. Her writing has been nominated for Best American Essays, the Pushcart Prize, Best of Net, Best Small Fictions, Best Microfiction, etc. She's a professional editor, teacher, speaker, and in my not humble opinion, the quintessential literary citizen. She is the best. It's always a thrill to chat with her. Hannah, welcome, and thanks for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me. I love working with you. I love 1455. I'm here for all of it.
Well, we always, of course, I'm going to say I love all my guests, and I do. But what I really cherish about you, in addition to the fact that we are very kindred spirits, we have collaborated and supported one another's initiatives, which is how it should be, but often isn't in our worlds. But one of the things I'd want to say right up front for people that haven't met you yet or read your work is that you're refreshing because you're one of the rare writers and people that's incapable of not being honest. Obviously, I think for you, there can be a burden to that, just being a very real person. But when someone meets you, hears you talk, takes one of your classes, or reads your amazing work, they're getting the unfiltered human experience. And I think that's one of the reasons your work resonates. But you're never pandering to a preconceived audience. And I think people need to understand that for certain types of ostensible paths to success, that seems like we're taught to figure out who our audience is and write to that audience. You definitely have fans and you have themes you return to, but you write from the heart. Am I adequately teeing you up in what makes you tick as as a writer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, thank you. Oh my gosh. I have no filter, or I haven't for most of my life. I've been working on trying to develop one to be an appropriate, professional adult, but I'm pretty bad at filter. I try to be very honest. I'm very bad at not being honest. When I will say that when I used to write freelance pieces, which is sort of what got me into writing, there were times I felt less honest. It's one of the reasons I left that type of writing. I still think I was more honest than is typical in the freelance world. And I did publish some very uncomfortably honest things in the Washington Post, Huffington Post, places like that. But and I do think we got to talk about all the stuff that everyone says we're not supposed to talk about. I think that's important to do, because otherwise we're isolated and lonely. But yeah, I do think that people have this idea of how to become a writer and what it means to be a writer. And I think some of those ideas entail platform and how to find a readership and all these things that I think are not helping their craft because they're not being themselves. And that is my goal as a teacher and as an editor, is to take what's here in my writers' heads and like match it to the page in a very authentic way. Even if we're writing fiction, right?
Yeah.
How authentic can we be? Let's get that filter out, unless it's intentionalized, right? Like, are
Yeah.
we writing with intention of having a filter? So yeah, I do believe in having a very specific audience in mind for a lot of the work we write, but that's because of the intention of the writing, not
Right.
because of anything other than that. As you can also tell, I meander as I walk, as I talk and talk and walk. And so, yes, wrapping back around, I believe that in this world, art is the only thing that is going to save us, especially now. And so writing is my art and the art I try to give to others. So it's got to be real. What's art if it's not real, it's AI then, right? So let's keep it real.
AI or phony, the phoned in stuff that doesn't respect the audience.
Yeah.
I think what I said was both obviously intended as a very genuine compliment, but also not to simply say Hannah's an autobiographical writer because A, it's not really accurate, but I do
No,
think it's
only
important.
in some places, right? Yeah.
But I think, you bring a very keen sense of motherhood, womanhood, a very contemporary sense of advocacy. Your sensibility is one that you said no filters, and I think that's true, but I don't think that does it justice because that almost implies there's a little lack of discipline, but the no filters is more unvarnished,
Yeah.
no equivocating, no compromise, especially when you're talking or writing about something that you feel is unjust or needs to be discussed in a more responsible way.
I have a lot of big feelings, and when I was younger, those were somewhat uncontrolled. That was hard. And then as I got older, and life hit me hard, I have kids, one of whom has profound needs. I write about that a lot. It gives you perspective, and you learn to rein in those wild, uncontrolled feelings. But it always comes to me back to actually, I went to theater school in New York in my early 20s, and it was a Meisner school. And the Meisner, I don't know if you know, you probably do, but I don't know if anyone else, knows much about theater. But the Meisner acting technique is one of the three like original techniques that we talk about. Um, and in Meisner, it sort of peels away the layers that society has forced on you in terms of politeness and manners and all that stuff. And it gets at the heart of what emotion is. And when I was younger, I had these huge emotions that did not serve me well socially. I am a neurodivergent ADD girl. I had a lot of impulsivity issues growing up. I had a lot of friends, but also a lot of behavior issues and was in trouble a lot. So I had stamped it down. That was my response to try to be a productive member of society. I was not very successful at doing it, but I tried real hard. And then I went to acting school and I couldn't cry. I couldn't laugh. I couldn't do any of these things on cue, which you have to do as an actor.
Right.
And the Meisner technique peels away all the bullshit and you start to like respond authentically to the situation. And unlike some of the like the method acting and some of the other stuff that you do as an actor where you like you want to cry so you like kill off your mom over and over again and it becomes less effective. You can't cry by the fifth time, right?
Right.
Eisner gives you the what if. I didn't realize that was preparing me to be a writer for fiction, for speculative nonfiction, the what if. I mean, I teach the what if all the time, every week. But at the time, it was putting yourself, your real you, into fictional situations. How would the real you react? And then when you were ready, you did character work. This is no longer you. This is a character you're developing. But then how does that character really react? Like you're this character now. How do you really react in these settings? And I didn't realize it was preparing me to be very emotionally vulnerable on the page and to also just be a real person in general. It was allowing me to become who I actually am and less polite, maybe. Though I think I'm a pretty polite person, but in general, like less concerned with what society says you're supposed to be and you're supposed to do. It served me well, especially the older I get and the less I give a shit what people are thinking all the time.
Yeah.
When you become a writer, you have to stop caring because if you care what people think, you're in trouble. You won't write honest work, even if it's fiction, even if it's poetry, and maybe not necessarily true, right?
Right.
So It's all about honesty, honest work, even when you're not writing nonfiction, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, it makes total sense, and I'm curious. I want to brag on you a little bit. You are the type of writer that genuinely develops fans, and I think
Oh,
it's
is that
part and
true?
parcel. Well, I mean, people follow you, and you are seen, I think, for a good reason as a voice on certain topics, or people want your take. And I think that validates the honesty, right? Like they're always in relation with one another. Like I know that you're not writing for the praise, but that has to be
Oh yeah.
deeply enriching as an artist when you know that you're aesthetically you're hitting your targets on the written page, but it's impacting people and you're hearing from those people. I do think that's one, and we can dive definitely deeper into the whole technological issue of our current time, but one big advantage that I don't think we talk about often enough when we talk about how everything's gone to shit is 30 years ago, 50 years ago, it was harder probably for a writer to get immediate feedback from people that read their stuff because they had
Yeah,
to pick up
that's
a pen and
true.
paper. Whereas, digitally online, you can get that. But I know that you have a relationship of sorts with the people that read your stuff. And I'm curious how that has given you kind of motivation and fuel to maybe in the early stages when you were being very honest and vulnerable, how much of that courage came from knowing this is resonating, this needs to be written about.
Well, it's important, I think, to note that I wasn't a writer until my 40s, my mid 40s, right? Um, I mean, I guess I wasn't, I didn't know it. When I was when I had heartbreak in college, I would write poems, but I didn't show anybody those terrible poems, right? And, um, and I would write a lot of Facebook posts when I was younger, but I wasn't a writer. And then in 2017, in my 40s, I was thinking more of it of being on stage. So it was more like a hearkening back to my acting days, which I had given up when I left New York. But I did this program. I guess I auditioned for it. I had to write something. It's called Listen to Your Mother, and I had to write a story about motherhood. And I wrote a story about my son's hospitalization on a psychiatric unit at age 8. And I wanted to tell that story because I was so alone. Nobody talked about a suicidal young kid. And I didn't have, like, all my friends had disappeared. I mean, they didn't really, but they kind of did.
Right.
My family disappeared. I was completely alone and very scared. So I wanted to tell that story. It wasn't about writing. I didn't think it was about writing. And so I went and auditioned, and I hadn't auditioned since my 20s. I mean, literally, 2 decades. And they accepted my piece. And I went up there, and me and a bunch of amazing moms, many of whom I'm still good friends with, we read our work. And when I got off the stage, and I will tell you, it's very hard for me to talk about myself this way because it feels very braggy, and I honestly hate that. But there was like a line of like so many people who wanted to come talk to me
Yeah.
because nobody talks about this stuff, right? They don't talk about these hard things. At that moment, there were two types of parenting stories, mostly mom stories, right? Because dad's so invisible, which is its own thing. Uh, but either you are a Hallmark mom, and everything is awesome, and motherhood is your everything. And I was a stay-at-home mom. Like I had chosen to be a stay-at-home mom earlier.
Right.
And then I thought I would go back to teaching. I was a public school teacher as a fifth grade teacher. I thought I would go back to that, and then I couldn't because my son was so ill. He was so, so ill. And he was mostly not in school, and I had to be with him all the time, 24/7. And so the other option was like super mom, like autism super mom. And so yes, he's on the autism spectrum, but autism isn't really his primary disability. It's mental health stuff that is
Yeah.
really intense for him. The autism is just like his awesomeness. Like we we love his autistic self, right? That mental health stuff is brutal though. That's the tough stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that stuff, you're not allowed to talk about that.
Right.
Nobody's allowed to talk about that. We can talk about autism, and you can be an autism mom. You can be an autism super mom. All these things you're allowed to do. And I hated them. I hated everything about it. It felt very fake. It felt very me, me, me. It felt not at all about the child. I didn't know yet why it felt so distasteful to me. I knew I wanted to write about taking care of my kids and about my own identity, but I didn't like what I was reading and on the page and online.
Yep.
And I didn't yet understand what I know now about own voices, about how to respectfully write about others who are in your life, especially your kids, that kind of stuff. That conversation I had never had before because nobody was writing about the stuff I was writing about.
Right.
So this listen to your mother thing, it led to lots of people saying, "Are you gonna keep writing? This is amazing." And I was like, "Well, I'm not a writer." And they're like, "Well, didn't you write this story?" And I was like, "Oh, I wrote that story, but I was just telling a story." And then people were like, "What do you think writing is?" Blah, 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 right? So I said, "Okay." And I wrote an essay that was more aligned to be read versus performed.
Right.
It's a similar story, but I really tried to reframe it a bit, and it got into the Washington Post. I mean, the Washington Post, right? That was like my first big major publication. And then I had one in Arlington Magazine around the same time about inclusion. So here's this one about having a child be hospitalized for psychiatric reasons at a young age, and then one about inclusion in the classroom. My
Yeah.
educational background made me really want to write about education and about disability. And I was like, maybe I'll start doing this. Those pieces got a lot of traction, and people started writing me with good and bad ideas.
Right.
Um, Wonderful, warm, appreciative emails and horrible, awful, accusatory emails. So I started realizing what this was like, and then I
Yeah.
spent the next year or so writing a lot of freelance essays and then sort of heading into journalistic stuff, how-to stuff, disability related stuff, op-eds related to education. And I could do this at 2 in the morning with a sick kid. I could do this in a parking lot. I could do this in a hospital waiting room. So I was like, I could do this. It
Yeah.
gave me a little something that was for me. But I wasn't really exploring the why of it at first. I just was doing it because I kind of had to.
Yep.
And it felt so good to like be heard and seen again after being completely alone. But I wasn't thinking about audience or fans or any of that stuff. And then more and more I was chafing. I was like, oh, this formulaic writing that has to happen so often makes me want to change what I'm writing into a more literary type. I started taking classes and working with editors to see if I could write more creatively and more interestingly about these very, very complicated subjects instead of it being this like surface level of
Yes.
this happened and this was really hard and this is what I learned and now we're all good because it's just that felt dishonest.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
can't, you know, I took a workshop once with Mira Jacob, and she said, we answer questions in the freelance work we do, and we ask questions in the literary work we do. And I was like, okay, goddess, genius. She
Oh,
was
right.
best workshop I ever did. Like, she's so amazing, right? And she was right. That
Yeah.
changed me forever, hearing her say that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to have conversations versus like wrap everything up in a neat little bow.
Yeah.
So I don't even remember if that's what you asked me, Sean, but here we are. Here we
Yeah,
are.
I mean, so there's so much that we could unpack for. I just want to thank you because that answer now I'm so glad this is being recorded for our sake, but for people hearing this or that will have the opportunity to hear this, you really just laid out like the hero's journey in a very succinct, like we are and I will say the real writers are inevitably drawn to the stories and pieces that haven't been written, that there's authenticity and originality there. There's the impulse that can stand up to rejection and solitude and the many setbacks, this compulsion to tell the truth, to tell one's own story, to speak up for people that are maybe not being spoken for, connecting authentically with readers and other human beings, the perseverance, and then going deeper into the work to try to find ways to make it more complicated, not less complicated. Basically, what you're describing is how a real writer is shaped and crafted, but also how the best work, the work that lasts, goes a little bit deeper, is not satisfied with these pat, formulaic outlines. And this is the stuff that resonates and I think sustains a style. So I would be hard pressed to say, well, what's Hannah's style? It's like honesty and exploring story is her style. But that's easier said than done. And your answer there really articulated on a lot of different levels how that works, which is something I'm fond of coming back to, which is, guys, there are very few, if any, shortcuts or hacks.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, I never want to say, so suffer, it's a lot of work. It's not that, it's more to develop one's own voice and to really find meaningful engagement, whatever that even means. There has to be something coming from a very, I think, personal place.
Yeah, I agree completely. Also, that's the first and I'm sure the last time anyone will say that my response was succinct. So thank you. This is a special moment for me. I'm a talker. I process by talking out loud. And so you're now my favorite person, Sean. Thank you. You were close before, but now top of the list. When I work with editors and students, the number one thing I teach now that I've been doing this a long time, where I didn't know this when I was first an editor and I was first teaching, is that we write with intention. Always. There's a reason we're writing. It could be to entertain. It could be funny. I have a mixed feelings piece. It's funny, right? Like it's fine. But especially in nonfiction, when we're writing personal essays or memoir, we're writing for a reason. We're either writing because we've had this really hard experience or this very, this unique or distinctive experience that other people maybe have not experienced, and we want them to get a chance to experience it, right? Or we write so other people will see, will feel themselves on the page. They will see themselves on the page,
Right.
and they will feel less alone. Or we write to prove something, to change something, to educate people. Like if I've done many educational op-eds. Specifically, my focus often is inclusion in the classroom. And if I'm writing those, the intention is very much to fix misinformation, to fix biases, right? So like those are reasons, right? Or, conversely, I'm writing to like, if I'm choosing to write just for catharsis, I'm choosing to write just for myself, that's fine. But then we say, like, if that's the true reason that I'm writing, then that might not be a publishable piece. That's not why I'm doing this, right? So we're always saying why. Why am I writing? And when we're honest about the why, it helps us reach our goals. If the goal of your work is because you want recognition, if the goal is because you want to sell a book or that can be a goal. But if that is the goal, honestly, then you write differently, right? Yes, then you pull you write a thriller, you write a romance, right? Like, and there's nothing wrong with that. I am fine. I get it. I can help you with that. I need to know the real goal. If the goal is a New York Times bestseller, it is not going to be the same book as if your goal is an honest memoir that makes people feel like, oh, I'm not alone. Now, is there a crossover? Yes, there's a Venn diagram there where there's crossover. And that's a delicate thing. And that happens in the freelance world too with just essays. Like I have written the occasional freelance essay that I could tell the truth. Truly, I could ask questions, but it's rare. It's a special thing when that can happen, and most are not like that. So we can break the rules, of course, but we have to be honest about our intent. I think that is an issue with emerging writers in particular, where they think they have all these answers and they think they understand the process, but they're not even being honest from the start with what they want. It's okay to be a highly anxious person who needs validation, because I am a highly anxious person who needs validation. And I like publishing online because of it, because yes, more people click. When I publish in even prestigious journals, if they're print only, fewer people read them, right? And if I want 1 million people to read my piece, I'm going to publish in Huffington Post, not a little tiny journal, right? So we have intent. We think about that all the time of what do I want from this? And that tells me, what type of essay am I writing? Or am I writing a short story? Am I writing a poem for this? How's it gonna hit? I don't judge anyone's intent, because it's completely fine to want to sell 1 million books. I would love to sell 1 million books. I'd like to finish this novel. But
everyone would.
If it's the number one goal, if it's really what I want, is recognition, then that's different. So for you to be like, oh, she's got fans, I'm like, I can't even imagine. I have such imposter syndrome with my writing that I don't have with my editing and my teaching, because I know that I am very capable as an editor and teacher because my clients and students have done very well with their work. They're writing amazing things, and I just nudge. I
Right.
give them push. I say, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? All the time. What's your intent? Like,
Yeah.
why are you doing this? Where are we going? I ask lots of questions and then they do the work and they're amazing. So I know I can do that. My own writing, whew, that's a whole nother story. But I appreciate the idea that my brand would be honest, a little ugly. People love to say raw, which I always think is like a backhanded compliment because I
Mhm.
work hard on my craft and I
Yeah.
don't think the writing
Yeah.
itself is raw.
Right.
People have said sometimes that my writing is like deceptively simple, and I'm like, that's a backhanded compliment too. Like, I don't write a lot of lyrical work.
Right.
I write work that I want a lot of people to be able to read. I want it to be accessible,
Yeah.
so I write conversationally. Um,
Yeah.
that's not every time, not when I'm
Yeah.
writing poetry, not when I'm writing a lyric essay,
Sure.
but it's what I prefer to write. It's probably because I started writing late, and it's what I prefer to read, honestly, is like real talk. Let's just, you and
Real
me,
talk.
have coffee. Tell me your story. What's up? And then that's what I want to read on the page too.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, I mean, in my opinion, that is invariably the sign of a more mature writer anyway, kind of the unadorned, getting to the marrow pretty quickly, as opposed to maybe hiding behind flowery or,
Yeah.
pretentious prose. That usually can be armor for, with the real issue that's being avoided or not addressed directly or, accurately or penetratingly. Once again, so much of what you just said, there's so much to lovingly pick apart. But as you were mentioning the different outlets and the different audiences, I thought to add to that, I have nothing to add. That was a total mic drop. But I just read today, I think it's George Martin and Tina Brown, two of the more successful writer editors on the planet, have recently started a Substack. And that's a whole topic about the literary landscape. But the reason that I read George Martin, I think, or maybe it was both, basically saying, I'm feeling increasingly constrained by the outlets I can write for, and I want to be more
Yeah.
honest. And I think what resonates with that for on I hate to say on a lot of levels, but for any writer out there listening to us, the reality is even if you are famous and wealthy and people want to publish you, there are rules in place. So I think it's very refreshing that someone like a Tina Brown or a George Martin or Stephen King, whoever would say, I actually want to have a more intimate relationship with my readership. I just think
Yeah.
that's a healthy place to be in an era of AI and fake news, et cetera. Like there is, I think, this real hunger for authenticity and real connection. And I think what we've seen over the last decade or more is that there's an illusion of the internet and the ability to access
Mm.
friends and acquaintances. And that's, I mean, it's all to the good, but people are hungry for what we might call old-fashioned interaction and something that seems meaningful and not designed to get clicks, not designed to go viral. It's designed to communicate. And I think that that's the primary impulse of any kind of writing.
It's really true. I have so many thoughts on all of this. I'll try not to go for 20 hours about it, but I will say that most of my recent shift and focus as an artist, as a writer artist, is actually from my students, my university students that I teach composition and rhetoric to versus creative writing,
Hmm.
or literature. And that is because when I started teaching composition and rhetoric, we started, I was working with 18-year-olds. I wasn't working with 22-year-old writing majors for these
Right.
classes, right? And these students weren't writers in their head. They weren't writers. Of course they were. They didn't know
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And they believed what they'd been brought up to believe. They believed what they saw online. They didn't really have a voice of their own in life yet, most of them. Or if they were starting to develop it, they didn't know why they believed what they believed or even truly what they believed in terms of how to be a person, much less be a student or a writer.
Yeah.
And so we started looking at the information we were taking in and deciding what we wanted to say in response, what we wanted to absorb, what we wanted to cast aside, what we believed. All these people who think that college professors, woke college professors are doing all this terrible stuff. And I'm like, ugh, it's so funny because
Yeah.
truly, um, we are preparing most of us, I think, I certainly am, we're preparing students to think for themselves, quite
Right.
the opposite of what they're saying. Make decisions for themselves for good reasons. It's all about intent, right? Everything. For me, it always comes back to the why. What is my intent? What is my goal? And as all of that was happening, the fear response to AI, my initial writer fear response, AI, bad, it changed because my students had very different reasons than I thought for using AI. And we started talking about what a AI can do,
Yep.
what it does poorly, what it takes away from us, what it helps us with, right? So my students with ADD were like, it helps me take my own work and organize it. So it makes sense to me and I feel more connected to my own work. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Right? That's a
Hello, right? So
yeah.
all these often older professors and writers who are like, yeah, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
yes, of course, but
Right.
also nothing is that simple, right?
Yep.
Students coming in where their teachers had given their chat GPT essays an A and their actual essays that they wrote a D and were irritated and didn't want to help them fix it. Like, I'm like, all right, who could blame a student who already did not consider themselves a writer or a thinker or a learner? They
Yeah.
use ChatGPT and all of a sudden they're considered a writer and a thinker and a learner. Like, I gotta fix this for them, not because AI is bad, but because I care deeply about them truly believing that they are a writer and a thinker and a learner.
Mhm.
So we started thinking about voice. We started thinking about what we believed, what we were saying, when anyone writes, they are developing their own voice that nobody else is like, right?
Yep.
And that matters even if you're not creatively writing. Though a lot of times this led to creative writing, which is amazing in its own
Yeah.
journey, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just so grateful to them because they deepened my relationship with my art. Because what AI can never do is it can never have an opinion, it can never think, it can never exist and create real art. It can like really help the doctors not fuck up my surgery. It can help with note taking. It
Yeah.
can show you how to use MLA format on your essay. Like I don't even know the difference between MLA and APA, and I gotta grade it, right?
Right.
So I'm like, all y'all should use the Google. Use
Yeah.
the Google, baby. MLA generator. Like find that. I don't care. Copy that. I don't care if you know where the colon goes or what's italicized. I don't care at all. That's me, your professor. I
Yeah.
care about your voice. I care
Yes.
about what you think and believe.
Yeah.
And so I think this this patronizing, disrespectful attitude that many older adults, especially in authority, have toward young adults, 18, 19, 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
I think that's the issue, not AI, right? And my students know that Chat GPT will not work in my classroom because we write outlines by hand and we do
Yeah.
rough drafts and we edit and we talk about the decisions we're making. And it's just too much work to try to cheat through that stuff. We might as well just become people and have thoughts. I don't have almost any trouble with it. And
Yeah.
I never fail someone for AI. I just make them sit and talk with me until they decide to do it themselves anyways. So I have none of
Yeah.
these problems that all these professors are complaining about. And that's not ego. That's not like,
No.
oh, I'm amazing. That
No.
really is just like maybe talk to your students. It's a lot more work. I'm not gonna lie. It's
That's
so
right.
much more work,
That's right.
and I don't get paid very much. I'm broke, but
Yeah.
God, it's fun. It's fun to talk to your students. So, and it helps me as a writer because now I'm thinking about why I write so much more. And it's also harder because now I don't want to fake write. I don't want to bullshit write at all. I was doing a mixture of that before, and then I was fixing the bullshit, but now I just want to write what's real and true, and
Yes.
that's hard. So, this novel's taken longer than I thought because like now I really, really care. I'm not doing it the way I started this novel because I was supposed to write a novel because all I did was short stories and essays, and everyone said you have to have a novel and you're never going to get a teaching job without a novel, and you're never going to be a famous writer without a novel, so you have to write a novel. And so I started writing a novel, even I didn't really want to, you know? But now I'm writing this novel that's very important to me, and it's really hard sometimes to come to the page
Sure.
and be so honest, and so it's taking a really long time. And that feels bad. It feels bad, but I feel like when I'm finally done, it won't feel bad. It'll feel better.
it'll feel way better. And I think again, what you just did there is what we're seeing is what I said at the outset: an honest writer, an honest teacher, an honest and authentic human being. And this is all about going deeper, trying to find one's own voice, trying to bring out authentic voices from others, how to teach better, how to adapt to circumstances. All of this is the Hannah Grieco experience that I savor. Um,
It's
I'd be
a lot of people
remiss.
are like, "Woo, girl, that's a little too."
Well, yeah, I mean,
I appreciate that. I respect that.
some people can't handle the truth. What
It's
can we
it's
say?
it's all right. Or maybe small doses. Maybe everyone should watch this in like 15-minute increments. I mad respect for anyone who can put up with me for a whole hour. I appreciate it.
Well, your students and readers among many will attest to the upside. But and you actually I didn't even have to ask you, and that's not surprising because I know you that you just segued naturally into your teaching and your passion for that. It's so obvious how much you care, which is everything. But I would be remiss because again, I think when I mentioned that you and I are kindred spirits, I think it's partly because we care deeply about writing and encouraging others, etc. But we also both kind of have navigated like we dip our toes in academia, we dip our toes in editing and publishing. We have felt the sting of rejection often. We've had some success. We've been involved in larger enterprises. But um, let's talk a little bit about where are we right now? Like, what's your take? And I know that's a loaded question, but the state of the industry, like as it relates to being a writer dash teacher navigating a very changing world.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I love to write very much. It feels good. But what I really, really love to do is teach. Editing is a form of teaching, in my opinion. It's the same. It's just we're focusing the teaching on a manuscript of some sort of length.
Yeah.
Um, and I am an adjunct professor, writing professor, both academic writing and creative writing, and also literature. I teach literature classes too. Um, and I edit prose collections and novels and memoir at a small press. I edit for a variety of literary journals. And I edit privately. I'm a book coach privately. I help people get agents if they want that or get their books into small or university presses. So I am involved in kind of all of those areas. I teach both privately and, on campus. Um, and there's a lot to that. I really believed, and you and I have talked about this before, I really believed um, that I wouldn't want to teach at the college level. I was teaching a lot of private classes and doing well with it. I was filling my classes and things were good. And then I was offered this from a wonderful person to teach at a very prestigious university, an advanced nonfiction workshop. And I went to one class and fell profoundly, like deeply, madly in love with the university student, the students in that class, and like pretty much all aspects of teaching at the university level. I didn't know I was going to like that so much. It just was like a fire exploded inside me. And I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I thought that was what I would do. So I got an MFA, um, and got got going to get this novel done because you can't teach without a novel, without a book of some kind, right? And I had a million publications. I've had a good publishing record,
Yeah.
but not a book, right? And then I got a job, I got hired to edit at this independent press, and I was on my path. I was on the way to
Yeah.
achieving my goals, both on the page and off. And then it became very clear after several years of adjuncting, and anyone who's in academia knows what I'm talking about here, that there's no work. I mean, it's also, I'm
Yeah.
older. I have three kids, one of whom has significant disabilities, and I can't leave the area, the DC area, right? So I can't go to Nebraska at a little university or a little college and work my way up and get tenure.
Right.
And there's a lot of writers, a lot of really good writers and good teachers in DC, so there are no jobs. But even if I could move, universities are moving away from tenure positions, even full-time positions. I mean, I think more than
Right.
50% of faculty and colleges are adjunct now at the university I was teaching at, which was a very expensive, very established, very famous university that we won't name. It was something like 65% of the teaching faculty was adjunct, which is gross. That is disgusting because those students are paying $50,000 to $60,000 a year, and I got paid $4,000 per class for an entire semester.
Yeah.
And when I would teach a private advanced nonfiction workshop, 6 months, I would make $16,000, and I would make 4,000, and that was the highest I was ever paid as an adjunct at the school I'm working at now, which is a wonderful, much smaller university, and they treat me better emotionally. They treat me better, but
Yeah.
I'm making 3,800, and
Yeah.
that's a 3 credit class. So you meet for 3 hours a week and all the office hours, and I'm meeting students constantly to help them because they need a lot of help grading, giving feedback on essays. It's like 3 cents an hour by the time we're done. So
Hmm.
all these assholes talking about, and I get this online about
Yeah.
um, teachers are doing this. And I mean, it literally had people tell me there were going to be tribunals and I was going to be burned at the stake. I mean, this is what people say on the MAGA side. It is wild.
Oh yeah.
They think that I teach like living Black poets, that I am ruining their kids' lives. And I'm like, I
Mm.
promise your white daughter can handle reading Jericho Brown. She's going to be fine. She's going to love it. In fact,
Right.
that's what you're worried about. She's going to
That's
love it.
100.
That's the fear because my white students are happy. They
That's right.
love it. They're not getting harmed by reading Danez Smith and Chen Chen. Like they are happy. They are loving it, right? So yeah, I got feelings, I got thoughts, but I'm doing all this almost for free.
Yeah.
It's not good for my family. It's not good for my heart to be so undervalued financially. I don't need to make a lot of money, but like I should make minimum wage and I don't.
That's right.
Working 60 hours a week to make $35,000 a year sucks.
Yeah.
And that's rough. That is rough. I come from a place of privilege in that my kids can eat because my husband makes enough money that they can eat, but we are struggling.
Right.
We're okay, but we're not like amazing because
Right.
of this decision I've made to do this.
Yeah.
And that's the state of academia. The school I teach at doesn't even have a lit major anymore. They have a broad humanities major, but they push everyone toward nursing and cybersecurity and all these other like fancier job type focus things. It makes no sense to me because English is almost free to offer as a major. Like no equipment necessary. It's the moneymaker at every school,
Right.
English, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of schools are getting rid of it. So there's fewer and fewer jobs, and most of them are adjuncts. And we're all just desperate to connect with students and talk and teach and write. And it hit me that I'm probably never going to be able to get a full-time job, even though I love it so much. Even though my students come back for class after class with me because they feel respected and they're learning so much. I'm really good at teaching. I get great student evaluations, all these things I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
Even if I have a New York Times bestselling novel, I have a feeling I still would have a hard time getting a full-time job. And it's brutal. It's brutal on the heart to know that you're making a difference in people's lives and that you're working really hard, and you still will not be able to have like a basic full-time job. That sucks.
So thank you for that, Hannah. And I've been developing a thesis for a couple of decades now, not particularly original, but I believe it more every year, which is that the intellectual and moral backbone of our society so much of that is provided from social workers, teachers, and nurses.
Mm,
And the system will remain broken, very ironically, in no small part to the fact that there are so many people like yourself that love it and are doing it for all the right reasons. There will always be just enough of a supply of people that really love the work and the calling and the mission so that they can continue to be exploited. So I don't know short term what the answer to that is. I do know, and I think I can say now, speaking only for myself, with tremendous conviction, that the more universities have mimicked the business world, the corporate world, like writ large, the
yep.
more of a catastrophe it's become because it's all bottom line.
Yeah.
We're
It's
seeing
true.
increasingly obscene administrative costs. Tuition has only increased. So the answer then is they're not losing money. Where's it going? It's going
Yeah.
to a handful of people with
Yeah.
arguably superfluous jobs.
Yeah.
Um, that's the business world. That's increasingly the academic world. So I think the bad news is everything you just said tracks. I think
Mm,
it's I think it's intractable right now. but I do think we're going to hit a tipping point where the free or close to free labor dries up. We're seeing it, I think, more in the secondary, grade school and high school. I've just in this area and in my peer group have seen people the mass exodus because people are finally fed up. It'll be a real tragedy if it requires something like that. But I do think there will be a recalibration. And I think our job in the shorter term, or my job, is to advocate for the humanities and advocate for this is actually saving our society money. It's actually creating happier citizens when we have people that can think critically, that can communicate effectively, and that maybe can have a degree where they're able to wear a bunch of different hats because that's the new normal. But we need to do a better job of connecting these dots between humanities are not an extraneous pie in the sky degree, and the people that are teaching, we need them desperately. I just wish I could wave a magic wand and make it better, but
Yeah, I wish you could too, because realistically, after this year, I think I have to stop doing what I'm doing. And like, I've lost a lot of sleep about this. I've cried a lot of tears about it because I don't think there are that many times in our lives that we can say, oh, this is right. This is good. And, just yesterday, my students in one of my literature classes, um, were giving presentations on poets. It's a class on identity in American literature. They didn't know any of these poets. They thought poets were Robert Frost,
right.
right? They're
Yeah,
thinking like Keats. Like, and nothing wrong with the classics, but there's
right,
so much more, right? And
right,
so
of course.
one group is doing a Jericho Brown presentation, and one group is doing an Ada Limon presentation. Someone
Mm,
else is doing a Dennis Smith presentation. So they've all picked these poets that they didn't know. And I think I have two white kids in the whole class, right? Not kids. They're all 18 to 20-year-olds, young adults, baby adults. And they didn't think they liked poetry, and now they love it. And it is not because of me, it's because of what they're reading. And listening to them analyze their these poems, talk about themes, talk about language and diction, talk about why they chose the poems they chose and what was meaningful to them on an individual level and as a group, because these group presentations. And I was so emotional, like in the back of the classroom, just watching and watching my class, like they're really listening and they're learning and they're experiencing these poems and they're shocked and awed by the art that they're experiencing. It's one of those rare moments where my weirdness meshes with what academia actually does want. This old school. I mean, I never thought I would be in academia because I hated school. I hated college. I hated all of it. I loved my MFA, but my MFA was not a typical MFA experience. Randolph, I was learning from Dennis Smith. I was learning from Maurice Ruffin. I was like learning from living writers. I hated classical education. That's
sure.
why I don't teach that way.
Yep.
But here, like, when the Venn diagram becomes a circle, right? Like, here are students who have never talked poetry in their lives, talking about line breaks and imagery from a Jericho Brown poem, and oh my God, right? Whew, be
Yeah.
still my heart. So, and I was like, this
Right.
is what I meant to do. This
Yeah.
is what I can bring to the world, and it's so great, and I have to stop doing it. And I try not to get emotional now. It's terrible. It's
Yeah.
so unfair.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, most people have to do jobs that aren't what they love, and I
Right.
just have to accept that. But I truly think it's tragic for students. So you're
Yes.
just going to have people who don't care teaching, who won't give extra effort because you don't pay them anything. I'm not even asking for a lot. I'm just asking for like
Right.
enough, right? And
Right.
then I was thinking, well, the key, maybe I could make 3 times as much in public school. I used to be a public school teacher. Maybe I'll, do the work and become a certified in high school English instead of I'm certified pre-K through 6th grade.
Right.
I don't want to go back to littles. I did that, and now I'm teaching older kids, and that's what I'm in that
Right.
zone. But even where I live, where it's very progressive, to
Mhm.
teach high school English,
Yeah.
you can't teach what's real. You teach what the parents let you teach their kids. So
Right.
you can't teach the stuff that I was wishing my students were coming into college with. Like all the stuff I'm trying to fix in them now.
Yeah.
Um, like there are teachers telling them that they're not smart, that they're not able to write, that they are no good at this. I mean, all these things that they're being taught. And I have amazing high school teaching friends. So like I'm not saying all teachers, some teachers, not all, of course.
Yeah.
But like all this terrible stuff that's happening. My own daughter is in ninth grade and hates English now because of 1.5 months of ninth grade English. She loved it. It was her favorite subject until high
Mm.
school, and now she hates it. And she gets straight A's, but she still hates it. So that's devastating, right? But if
Yeah.
I went back and tried to fix that, I'm like, okay, that could be my heart. I could find my heart there. How do you find your heart when you have to offer 10 alternatives to a Baldwin short story because that might make somebody uncomfortable? Like, what? I can't, and that's in a progressive county. How am I going to do this?
Right.
How could I teach high school English when I don't get to decide what I teach? And I don't get to decide, like I can't do what I do only teaching Robert Frost. I don't want to teach only Robert Frost. So,
Yeah.
that like how could I go do that? Like maybe I'd rather just like bag groceries, honestly, because at least then it doesn't hurt my heart. I'll
Yeah.
make about the same money, honestly. Nobody pays public school teachers anything anyways. And the rules are getting worse and worse, and the paperwork is getting worse and worse, and the meetings are getting worse and worse, but the students are less and less important to the administration and to counties.
Yeah.
So it just feels hopeless. If I just could win the lottery, that was the joke last night talking to my husband. He was like, I'm going online. I'm joining the lot. Let's do the lottery because I would love to start an independent press. The
Right.
independent press I edit at is on hiatus
Hmm.
because independent presses are circling the drain right now, right? I mean,
Yeah.
even the big presses are struggling.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
so I just want to make art and help people make art. That's all I care about,
Yeah.
honestly, is I think it saves us and I don't know how to do it without being independently wealthy. The only reason I'm able to even adjunct right now is because of the privilege of where I come from. And that's with a struggle. And eventually I can't keep doing it because it's not fair to my family that we
Right.
can't do the things we could do if I just had a regular job.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, so I don't, Sean, it's rough.
Well, it is, and I mean, shocker, but your honesty is both appreciated and necessary. I share all of your concern, your disdain. Like I said earlier, and I don't say it lightly, I truly believe maybe a series of tipping points are going to need to roil the academic institutions, the business community. We have a big election in a month that's probably going to put us decades further behind, or maybe open up some possible pathways toward a more progressive accounting that needs to occur where we realize maybe we need to pay a living wage, maybe to create a more harmonious society. It does start with education, and it does start with the quality of the teachers, the stability that is due them. But and we could go down that road further, but what I want to maybe end on, not to instill a fake sense of optimism, because what you just said is so real. And again, I'm right there with you, full
Yeah.
agreement. But I also think what you're saying underscores something else that we share, which is the importance of when we talk about literary citizenship and this notion of whatever, however cliche be damned, the notion of the rising tide lifting boats in the artistic community, when we are celebrating others and doing what we can to shine a light on the work that we all do as teachers, as writers, as citizens, as mothers, as human beings, that is doing the work. And I think too many people that I interact with have tuned out on that, and are facing too much rejection, are too disillusioned with the way things are, and are not trying to shine a light. What I think you always have time for, and what I want to celebrate you always doing, is you've always got time to um, share the wealth, shine a light, celebrate others and your own work. For me, that is one of the ways that I counter what can be an overwhelming sense of despair, is if we're not
Yeah.
lifting each other up, then shame on us.
Yeah,
Because if
I
we're not going to
agree.
do it, no one else is going to do it.
Well, I mean, I got into writing because I was completely alone. I felt like nobody had ever experienced what I was experiencing. And and so because nobody was writing about it or talking about it, I didn't see any representation of what it was like to have a profoundly mentally ill kiddo
Hmm.
and what that did to me as a person who loved him so much. And I was struggling with my mental health as well, right?
Sure.
And so when I started writing, I started meeting other writers and I started meeting readers, and I realized it wasn't true that I was alone. Art does bring people together. That's so cliched sounding, but it is
So
also
true.
a very, very true thing. Um,
Yeah.
the older I get, the more sentimental I get. I just
I don't think it's
no
sentimental at all.
fewer and fewer days where I have a filter and more days where my emotions are just right out there for the whole world to see.
Yeah.
Because even though they're not as wild as they were, they're very real. And
Hmm.
I just think that every time you read something that someone has written, like they've just taken a part of themselves and offered it to you as a present. And now you've taken that present and you've learned about yourself and you've learned about them and you've learned about your own writing if you're a writer. I mean, reading is the best lesson for writing always, no matter what. A lot of writers don't want to read. It's so funny to me. I'm like, you know that you can't be good at this if you don't read. It's a truth.
Right.
It's an objective thing.
Yep.
I know you think you don't have time, but I promise your writing is bad if you're not reading. It's just how it is. I had to force all
Preach.
my students and all my clients to always be coming back to the page that way. But I mean, it feels that's why I love editing. It's why I
Yeah.
would love to have my own independent press. But whew, there's no money in that, that's for sure. But like
Right.
creating the opportunity for someone else to share art. Oh my gosh. Editing is helping people craft their own art, right? And so, I mean, it's better than writing even. Truly. I mean, I love writing, but there's something inherently self-serving in writing, right? And in helping other people write, um, you're creating art with them and you're helping them achieve what they dream of. And it's just very special. And even if it's just you're on Instagram and you're sharing someone's work, you're 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 weaving your little spider, weaving your web, right? You're like, I love this piece, and you introduce it to Betty, who really likes that piece too, and now she follows them, and she's like, I'm gonna go read more of her stuff, and then she's like, oh, Betty was so nice, thanks, Hannah, and then she's like, oh, I love Betty's work, and now two people who didn't know each other are reading each other's work, right? And then yeah, sometimes they put your work back out there too, so you get a little something back, which is nice. It's nice that people read your work. But then like they meet somebody else and they've worked with you and now you've got a bigger web and like, oh, Betty is a friend I've never heard of and oh my gosh, that poem's amazing. Oh, I'm going to share that poem. Now you're creating
Yeah.
community, right? And the phrase literary citizen, we've been using it for a long time and some people hate it and I get why they don't like that phrase. But the idea under it is so important, which is
Yeah.
that we don't create art just for ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, and that comes back to the beginning of what we were talking about, like, why are we doing what we're doing? If I'm just creating art for myself, then I'm not publishing it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if I am publishing work, I'm putting it out there, it's
Yeah.
for more than just me. It
Yeah.
belongs to the people I'm sharing it with, right?
Yeah.
And it's a gift and they're
Yeah.
going to learn from it and give to others, right? So, like, wouldn't we want to be a part of that? And that I think that people, and in my classes, my students sometimes get confused about it. You don't have to be like me, like a big talker and outgoing, and oh, like I'll talk to anybody, anywhere. I can talk to a group of 1,000 comfortably with a microphone, and it does not bother me. Um, and so I don't think you have to be an extrovert or a fake, and I'm a fake extrovert. I'm like a masked extrovert. I'm like a truly an introvert. But I do think you don't have to be that. You can still tell someone you love their work
Yes.
digitally, like on X or on Instagram or on Blue
Yep.
Sky or wherever. You can still share a poem on Facebook. You can still text someone and be like, "Oh, did you read this?" I give books everywhere to all people. Like,
Yeah.
um, I teach the books that I love and to my students, and I bring in the writers so they meet them.
Yeah.
because authors will always do that. So many authors will come and do a class visit. They love it, right?
Sure.
And students are like profoundly changed by those experiences. So there's so many things you can do um, to be a part of making art important in your life and other people's lives. So, I mean, that sounds so trite, but I really believe it. I really believe it, you know?
Well, I'll semi end on the note I started on, which is that we are kindred spirits, and that's why I don't think it sounds trite, and it not only because I ardently believe it myself, but I think it's everything. Community is the impulse behind creativity. Creativity feeds that community, and then one becomes a literary citizen, which is to me distinct from being an artist, which is its own set of obligations and responsibilities and pressures. Literary citizen means you're part of something larger than yourself.
Yeah.
And that means you're giving something more than just your writing. I think a lot of people think that the buck stops with the creativity, and for some people that works. But the types of people that are trying to make progress happen, so on a cultural level, I think are willing and able to give a little bit more, and that's what you do. And Hannah, I think I will repeat, I think what I've said before, which is my only criticism of you and talking to you is there's so much there, it's impossible to cover, but the way out of that is the conversation. There's always more. I feel like we barely scratched the surface, but we did everything I wanted to do, which was talk to you, get a handle on what are we seeing going on right now. And I think I'll give you the final word, but I think what we're getting at is there's a lot of responsibility, a lot of work that needs to be done on a personal level as a writer, but the situation right now is not positive. But what hope do we have other than to resist the tides and make our voices heard, advocate for change, not be satisfied with the status quo, push back against the forces that want us apathetic and silent?
Yeah.
We're doing our work if we do that, but we need to do more of it. We need more support. What did I not
Oh,
cover?
I think you covered it all. I think it's important to remember when it feels like, what's the point? AI's got this and everything is bad, and what if Trump wins and blah, 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 blah. Like, um, it still goes viral the most on visual social media, and that's screenshots of poems. Like that stuff still goes everywhere, right? Like I log into Facebook and my mom's on Facebook, right? And she's sharing a poem that she saw on some grandma page, you know what I mean? And like
Yeah.
and then like I'll log into X and I'll be looking at random depressing things and like an excerpt from somebody's essay will pop up and it's got 50,000 likes, right? And then
Yeah.
on Instagram it's a snapshot of someone's art and it people are still hungry for that even though they
Yes.
think they're not. And my students who like were like we don't read are like reading with me and loving it. And they're like, I didn't know a short story could do that. I didn't know a poem could do that. So it's there. We are
Right.
hungry as
Yes.
humans. It's
Yes.
not just those of us with MFAs that are hungry for writing. And in fact, I said this on
Yeah.
X the other day. I was like,
Yeah.
established writers, like people who've published a ton and very
Yeah.
literary nature, like often um, don't read as much. And they often are like not trying new things and doing exciting stuff. But then I'll have like my students who say they don't read, but they actually read obsessively. They read every romance novel or they read all this fantasy. And they read a lot, actually. But they don't think of
Yes.
it as reading because they're not reading Moby Dick. And I'm like, oh girl,
Right.
that's reading. Okay. I don't read Moby Dick either. Like that is reading.
That's
And
right.
and then they read a short story and they're like, oh my God, or an essay. I didn't know. I did like I introduced them to Shakira Diaz and we read an excerpt from Ordinary Girls and they were like, oh my God, this is an essay. This is nonfiction. And I was like, oh,
Right.
the world just opened up to you,
That's
right?
right.
So,
That's right.
and these are students who are first generation college students who
Yeah.
come from houses where like there is a lot of love for art, but not necessarily a lot of love for the written word, right? So
Yeah.
necessarily not, I'm making a generalization there, but there is a lot of storytelling, there's a lot of art. So I think we have to reframe what we think of as art,
Yeah.
how we're judging it as literary writers. I think that's the path forward. Um, I saw an amazing poet last year who said, I'm not writing anymore. And I don't want to say his name just in case I don't want to steal his thunder at all, but he's an incredible poet. And he said, I'm not writing any more books. I've written six well-received collections, and I'm moving in a new direction because I need to reach an audience in a new way. Books are not the path forward. And I was like, ouch. He goes, I wouldn't want to be a novelist in this day and age. I'm like still working on my novel, right? And I was like, oh, but that means there's hope. That means there's hope for
Yes.
our art and for the written word and for storytelling. Because in the end, it's about storytelling, right? No matter the genre.
Yes.
So I think people will always need that. I don't think AI can give us that. I don't think,
Nope.
clickbait can give us that. That's what I think. I might be wrong.
You're not wrong. You're awesome. Facilitating epiphanies, advocating for authenticity. That's the Hannah Grieco that I know and love. We got more of it today. So grateful. I know we've created some new fans, so they will want to check out our ongoing conversation. So, as always, I ask dash demand that we lock horns again sometime soon, and
I love it.
we'll check
I
in.
love it. You're so nice to listen to me go on and on.
I always learn from you. I'm always inspired by you, and I know I'm not alone. So I couldn't be more satisfied. I couldn't be more grateful for you dispensing your wisdom in your own way. The authenticity, the passion always shines through. So thank you for being you. I really mean that. I adore you. It's great to spend time. So
Thank you
more
so
soon,
much for having
please.
me. Thank
More
you.
soon, please. We'll deal with you more later, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Some things considered. Reminder, we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity, and we are trying to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. So, a reminder, buy books, share poems, be involved, be active, don't give in to the despair. Drop me a line if you want to be a guest or you want to recommend someone. Check out SeanMurphy.net, and we will see you soon. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at SeanMurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.